Prabhupada ki jai. So the title of this morning's discussion is The First Step of the Guru in ISKCON. Now, something I should say right now is what we're trying to achieve here. We don't expect to resolve the issue during 3 or 4 hours this morning, but we're going to give a chance for the issue to be aired in public in this fashion, maybe for the first time. We met this morning, the participants met this morning for about a half an hour to go over the format and agree on the rules of the presentation and so forth. So what's going to be happening is that for the next hour, the devotees from New Jaipur will be presenting their point of view on this issue. And then after that, we've allotted another hour for a reply by Rabindra Sarup and Jayadvaita Swami. Then after that, we're going to take a 15-minute break. And immediately after the break, we're going to have a question and answer session. The questions should be submitted in writing. And the questions will be answered by both groups within a specified amount of time. So as you think of questions, issues that you'd like to see discussed or brought up, then please write them down. You can either give them to Naveen Krishna during the break, or Mahashringa, the Sergeant at Arms, will periodically go around and collect your questions. The questions that will be accepted will be questions that are the most on the topic and seem to be relevant and interesting to the greatest number of devotees.
People should specify if they have these questions directed toward a particular person or to one side or to everyone.
Both points of view are going to have a chance to express themselves on each issue. Now, we've also decided on a few rules for the discussion. Number one is that we're not going to talk about the history of the development of the Guru system after Srila Prabhupada's departure. We feel that that issue has been gone over enough, but the focus of this discussion is what system did Srila Prabhupada want for continuing the disciplic succession. And we'll also focus on the present state of initiations in ISKCON. A few operating rules are that the speakers will be interrupted if they significantly wander off the topic, or if they cast aspersions on any individual, either present or not present, on their character or their motives in devotional service. Also, speakers will be warned if they insult any other speaker, or if the voices start to get raised, or somehow or other this discussion is interrupted. And not heeding the warning, then the speakers will lose their speaking privileges. Yes, Hari Vilasparu.
What if someone in the audience has a comment to make and not a question?
Then mention that on your piece of paper. Pass it forward. You have a comment to make on a specific topic. And if there's time after if we see that everyone is satisfied in the questions and answers and that the major issues have gotten aired, then if we have a little extra time, we'll allow devotees to get up for a few minutes and speak their point of view. Since we're not expecting to reach a conclusion here, the last half an hour of this meeting, which is running till 2 o'clock, will be dedicated to taking proposals for continuing the process. First, we're going to ask the devotees whether you're interested in continuing this process, whether you think that it should be discussed further in the society. And if so, then we'll take specific proposals as to how this could become an ongoing process until such time as it's resolved. Any questions about the procedure? Okay, then we'll begin.
Didn't we agree on a specific topic?
Yeah. Want for continuing the Sampradaya.
I said that.
Yeah.
What system did Srila Prabhupada want to implement?
Okay, any other questions?
All right, the floor is yours.
We're going to focus in on the present state of the Guru system in ISKCON. We're not going to talk about what happened after Srila Prabhupada departed, what mistakes people think may have been made or like that. Yes, Prabhu?
Would it be reasonable to ask if another few of the devotees here could go on the side, let's say the GBC side or whatever, with Jayavardhan Swami, and in case they do have comments like some other devotees could speak up without sending the paper and so on.
Well, that's up to them. This is their presentation. If they want to bring anybody else up, they're free to, but you have to negotiate that with them. Okay, so I'd like to thank all the participants for taking the trouble to come here. And before we start, let's take a moment to offer our obeisances to all the assembled Vaishnavas.
Is this supposed to be working?
Okay, quiet please. We don't have any microphones here for amplification.
Nam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Sunyavari Paschatya Deshatarine. So thank you very much for having us here and allowing us to speak. This paper that I'm going to present today is more or less a follow-up to the VVR 11 issue. So the background of what we're going to speak about to some extent is this VVR 11. We've passed a number of them around the room, so if you didn't get one, I'm sure there'll be somebody near you who does have one.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. I'm Rupa Vilas Das. This is Nityananda Prabhu, the president of the Jaipur, Karnamrita Prabhu, the, what shall I call you? One of the editors of Vedic Village Review, Jasodanandan Prabhu, from Toronto. Glorydas Pandit is here, and various other devotees. All right, so this paper is kind of follow-up to that last issue of Vedic Village Review. Maybe perhaps you'll get the time to do that later on. The title of this is Evidence and Precedents for the Ritvik System. Questions have been raised as to the historical precedents of the Ritvik Acharya system. What must be immediately noted in this regard is that many of Srila Prabhupada's activities as an Acharya were unprecedented, as were many of the activities of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Some have argued that Srila Prabhupada did not perform any unprecedented activities, but this is clearly not the case. Some examples of such changes are: 1. Harinam Diksha being given by mail. 2. Brahminical initiation being given by tape recording. 3. Ritviks or deputies chanting on initiate's beads. 4. The performance of marriages by a sannyasi. 5. Young unmarried women being allowed to live in the ashram as brahmacharinis. 6. Initiates' names being given at the time of Harinam Diksha. These activities, especially those relating to Diksha, were all unprecedented. Yet, at the same time, there were pragmatic arrangements made by Srila Prabhupada to facilitate his running of a worldwide Vaishnava society. He quite obviously could not be everywhere at once. Yet such arrangements would allow him to give maximum encouragement to his followers, with whom he could not often personally associate, for training, instruction, and initiation. The scriptural principle is that one must approach a bona fide guru for initiation. The procedural aspects are details. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also performed activities unprecedented in the Gaudiya Sampradaya. For example, 1. He adopted the Ramanuja Sampradaya system of sannyas. 2. He allowed brahmacharis to wear the saffron cloth previously reserved for sannyasis. 3. He gave Brahminical initiation to all varnas. 4. He allowed sannyasis to wear sewn cloth, to ride in cars, to travel across the ocean, etc. All of these activities were forbidden by the Vedas. All of the changes instituted by these acharyas were practical arrangements which were meant to facilitate the preaching of Krishna consciousness in human society. A Mahabhagwat or Mahajan may perform unprecedented acts or create novel methods for the salvation of humankind. Srila Prabhupada details this prerogative of the powerful Acharya in the pages of Chaitanya Charitamrita. For example, every Acharya has a specific means of propagating his spiritual movement with the aim of bringing men to Krishna consciousness. Therefore, the method of one Acharya may be different from that of another, but the ultimate goal is never neglected. Therefore, although I am a sannyasi, I sometimes take part in getting boys and girls married, although in the history of sannyas, no sannyasi has personally taken part in marrying his disciples. Arrangements made by fully liberated and authorized souls whose will and sound vibration are not different to Lord Krishna's establish precedents which may be followed without any fear of there being defective understanding, cheating, mistake, or illusion on their part. This having been said, it is worth pointing out the origins of the Ritvik system. A Ritvik is an officiating priest who performs a sacrifice or ritual on behalf of another. This is described in the Manu Samhita. My Sanskrit's not good enough to try to pronounce this, but you can see the verse. He who has been duly chosen to act for another person, for the purpose of setting up a fire sacrifice, for performing a sacrifice where cooked grains are offered in the sacrificial fire, or for performing the Soma Yagya and other such yagyas, is called his Ritvik, officiating priest. Manu Samhita 2:43. In 22, we find Ritvik rendered as learned performers of sacrifices, and correspondingly in Srimad Bhagavatam 10:23-10, we find the line Mantra Tantra Vichog Agnaha. There, the word Ritvijaha is translated as priests. It is obvious from the preceding sense that the concept of Ritvik has its origins in Vedic literature, and a Ritvik is one who performs a sacrifice or ritual on behalf of another, senior Brahmana. Srila Prabhupada began to use this system of officiating priests when his mission of the world. I just want to point out that he did not start to use this term heaven, as far as I know. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but this terminology,
Ritvik, was not known by many, at least till then. Possible for him to chant on hundreds of sets of beads, threads, etc.
During these years, he instituted a number of unprecedented practices to facilitate the initiation of new men. These practices were: 1, the status of officiating priests being conferred on mlechas who had taken up the practices of Vaishnava. 2, chanting on the beads of initiates by such deputies. 3, second initiation granted via such deputies by a tape recording. 4, spiritual name-giving transacted by mail. And on the basis of recommendations sent to him by his temple presidents, he granted all camps his shelter and had his deputies perform the ceremonials. This system was briefly suspended in 1977 when he became very ill. It is important that deputies were not known as Ritviks pre-1970. No one in ISKCON was termed, only very briefly in Srila Prabhupada's books. 77, Srila Prabhupada had some discussions with Tamal
Krishna Goswami about naming Ritvik Acharyas he had. According to the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, who both spent much time with His Divine Grace, in 1977, Srila Prabhupada intended to set up a Ritvik system with some adjustments made for the time when he would no longer be with us. Although Srila Prabhupada had high hopes for his disciples' advancement, he noted on several occasions in his last years that none of them were fit to be acharyas or bona fide spiritual masters.
that a Ritvik system to continue after his departure was desired by Srila Prabhupada has been confirmed by the statements of Srila Prabhupada, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Jasodanandan Prabhu, and Gauridas Pandit Prabhu. Consider, for example, the first of the appointment discussions. Question, Satsvarup Maharaj. Then our next question concerns initiations in the future, when you are no longer with us. We want to know how first and second initiations would be conducted. Srila Prabhupada, yes, I shall recommend some of you to act as officiating Acharya. Tamal Krishna Maharaj. Is that called Ritvik Acharya? Srila Prabhupada, Ritvik, yes. May 28, 1989. Now, it is interesting to note that among the GBC men present at the time of this exchange, Satsvarup Maharaj, Rameshwar Swami, Kirtanananda Swami, and others, no one but Tamal Krishna Goswami was familiar with this term Ritvik. The question arises as to how the term and its meaning became known to him. In the Topanga Canyon talks, December 3rd, 1980, Tamal Krishna Maharaj admitted that there had been discussion of Ritviks prior to the May 28th meeting with Srila Prabhupada. What actually happened, this is a quote, what actually happened was that Prabhupada mentioned that he might be appointing some Ritviks. So, the GBC met for various reasons, and they then went to Srila Prabhupada, 5 or 6 of us. To date, we have no recordings of those prior discussions. According to Gauridas Pandit, there were discussions about Ritviks which were taped, which are presently not available, their whereabouts unknown. He specifically remembers that Srila Prabhupada stated that the Ritviks would, quote, initiate disciples on my behalf when I leave the planet. This, of course, simply confirms Srila Prabhupada's statement from the May 28th conversation. The question arises that if there were significant discussions before or after the May 28th meeting about the functions and duties of Ritvik Acharyas, then why are the recordings of those discussions not available? Where are the recordings? If the discussions were not recorded, then the question is, why not? Tamal Krishna Maharaj has admitted that there were discussions prior to the May 28th meeting. Where are the recordings thereof? These discussions would have great relevance to the present issue. Gauridas Pandit Prabhu reports that in 1977, when he related Srila Prabhupada's remarks about Ritviks initiating on his behalf after his departure, a number of devotees, including Jasodanandan Prabhu, Tamal Krishna Maharaj came to know of it. He became furious and reportedly stated, Gauridas, you're finished. You'll never be allowed to do service for Prabhupada again. I told you not to tell anyone what Prabhupada says without first clearing it with me. After this, Gauridas' service was apparently suspended for some days, but no suitable replacement was found, and he was re-engaged with suitable warnings about repeating Prabhupada's remarks without clearance from Tamal Krishna Maharaj. On July 8, 1977, Srila Prabhupada named 11 Ritviks who were stationed in various parts of the world so that geographical considerations were accounted for. That is, a candidate could approach a Ritvik who was physically nearby in order to receive initiation from Srila Prabhupada. During the discussion, Srila Prabhupada added another feature to the system. Tamal Krishna Goswami, referring to the Ritviks chosen by Srila Prabhupada, these men, they can also do second initiation. So there's no need for devotees to write to you for first and second initiation. They can write to the man nearest them. But all these persons are still your disciples. Anybody who would give initiation is doing so on your behalf. Srila Prabhupada, yes. Srila Prabhupada thus took himself out of direct involvement with the process of initiation. The prospective disciples were to approach their temple president, who would write to the local Ritvik. Srila Prabhupada wanted the book of disciples' names continued, and he confirmed his own detachment from any further direct participation in the initiation procedure, saying, so without waiting for me, whoever you consider deserves. That will depend on your discretion. On July 9th, a letter was sent out, signed by Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and signed and approved by Srila Prabhupada, describing the procedure of Ritvik initiation in detail. See enclosure. We have a copy of that letter included in the booklet. That letter was signed by Srila Prabhupada, and it's included in this booklet here. Jasodanandan Prabhu reports meeting with Tamal Krishna Maharaj on July the 10th, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj showed him the letter. Jasodanandan Prabhu wrote down the following exchange immediately after the incident. Jasodanandan Das, what does all of this mean? Tamal Krishna Goswami, devotees have been writing to Prabhupada asking for initiations, and now Prabhupada has named 11 Ritviks who can initiate on his behalf. Prabhupada said that others can be added. Jasodanandan Das, and when Prabhupada departs, Tamal Krishna Goswami, there'll be Ritviks. That's what Prabhupada said. In a letter to Kirtananda Swami, written by Tamal Krishna Maharaj on July 11th, this is also included in this booklet, we find the following interesting remarks. A letter has been sent to all the temple presidents and GBC, which you should be receiving soon, describing the process for initiation to be followed in the future. Srila Prabhupada has appointed thus far 11 representatives who will initiate new devotees on his behalf. You can wait for this letter to arrive. The original has been sent to Rameshwar Maharaj for duplicating. And then all of the persons whom you recommended in your previous letters can be initiated. I have marked the expression in the future because if the above-mentioned Ritvik arrangement was only for the time up until Prabhupada's departure, as some have claimed, then why not say for the present, for the immediate future, or until further notice? The phrase in the future does not indicate any cessation. One might arguably propose that to even hint at Srila Prabhupada's departure would have been in poor taste, even offensive. Yet, Srila Prabhupada had already announced his imminent departure in May of 1977 upon arriving from Rishikesh, and had regularly repeated the inevitability of this event thereafter. What's more, Satsvarup Maharaj had already asked Srila Prabhupada about the initiation arrangements for the time after he left us on May 28, 1977. Thus it appears that communications about the new system were left deliberately vague for purposes unknown, although it would clearly have been relevant to explain what future was being described. Notably, in the letter to the GBC, the temple and temple presidents, there is no mention of, this is incorrect, so I have to correct this. There is a mention of time in the letter that was sent out to the GBC and the temple presidents. It says henceforward. Well, henceforward, in the dictionary, both henceforward and henceforth both mean from this time on, indicating the indefinite. So, the letter of July 10th, which describes the Ritvik system, the discontinuance of which is not even implied, stands as the last written document personally authorized by Srila Prabhupada regarding initiations. Had he wished the Ritvik system to be discontinued upon his physical demise, and knowing his disciples' tendency to misunderstand his instructions, why did he not state his wish in writing? He certainly had adequate time to do so. Srila Prabhupada had gone to the trouble over the years to set up this Ritvik system and had seen its effectiveness and practicability. In the last year of his life, he discussed Ritviks on a number of occasions with his secretary Tamal Krishna Goswami, though some of those discussions have never been made known to anyone except by a passing reference to them by Tamal Krishna Maharaj in the Pyramid House talks of 1980. Srila Prabhupada did authorize and sign a letter sent out to all GBC men and temple presidents naming specific persons to carry out the Ritvik function. He removed himself as a participant in the initiation process for the last 4 months of his life, yet affirmed disciples so made as his own. This was a successful trial run of his plan, and it was proven to work successfully with no significant changes required. The following conversation is recorded in Hari Sari's diary for October 18, 1977. This is also in the, is on tape. The tape record also exists of this conversation. I found it on the microfiche just before I came here, so it's not an imaginary conversation if anyone wants to check it. Srila Prabhupada, Hare Krishna, one Bengali gentleman has come from New York. Tamal Krishna Goswami, yes, Srila Prabhupada, Mr. Sukhamoy Rai Chowdhury. Srila Prabhupada, so I have deputed some of you to initiate. Tamal Krishna Goswami, yes. Srila Prabhupada, so I think Jai Pataka can do that. If you like, I have already deputed. Tell him some deputies. Jai Pataka's name was there. So I depute him to do this at Mayapur, and he may go with him. I have stopped for the time being. Is that all right? Tamal Krishna Goswami. What, Srila Prabhupada? Srila Prabhupada, this initiation, I have deputed my disciples. Is it clear or not? Tamal Krishna Goswami, it's clear. Srila Prabhupada, you have got list of names, and if by Krishna's grace I recover from this condition, then I shall begin, or I may not. But in this condition, to initiate is not good. Here, less than a month before Srila Prabhupada's departure, he has not ordered anyone to be an initiating guru. He continues to refer to his disciples as deputies, Ritviks. Anyone to be an initiating guru. He continues to refer to his disciples as deputies, Ritviks. Despite Srila Prabhupada saying, I have stopped for the time being, I have deputed my disciples, and this condition to initiate is not good, still all the disciples made at that time were considered his. What's more, he asked Tamal Krishna Maharaj, this initiation, I have deputed my disciples. Is it clear or not? His Holiness's answer, it's clear. From this exchange, it appears that the concept of Ritvik was something that had been repeatedly discussed, and Srila Prabhupada was asking Tamal Krishna Maharaj to question him further on it if there was any confusion in his mind. Apparently there was not. And yet, later in the Pyramid House talks, Goswami Maharaj claims to have been confused about Srila Prabhupada's intentions. Tamal Krishna Maharaj has nevertheless admitted in the Pyramid House talks that Srila Prabhupada only appointed Ritviks. Thus it appears that this system had been put in place indefinitely for would-be disciples until someone proved to be a qualified acharya. There is no other natural or logical conclusion to be made. An example of a Ritvik system. There are a few interesting examples of Ritvik systems in Vaishnava history, one of which may be mentioned at this time. In an article called Declaration of the Spiritual Succession of Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat, one of the last lectures given by Srila B.R. Sridhar Maharaj, a book called Sermons of the Guardian of Devotion, he outlines a succession which involved appointing Ritviks for carrying on the process of initiation. He admits to having Sundar Govinda Maharaj the of the Mat, meaning the managerial control. Then he states that he is giving him full responsibility of giving Harinam, Sannyas, etc.
as an acharya of this mat on behalf of myself. He goes on to say, with this I transfer these beads, and from now he will do behalf as Ritvik. The Ritvik system is already involved both here and also in the foreign land. The Ritvik is the representative. So if you take from me, and you take by his hands, then it will be as well and as good as taking from me. In the Mahamandal, the world, this Mahamandal in Sanskrit refers to the world, Sagar Maharaj, formerly Akshayananda Swami, and many others, they are also Ritvik of Swami Maharaj. As I mentioned here, this is how Srila Prabhupada is known in the Gaudiya Mat. And also myself. They may do so. But in this Mat, he, Govinda Maharaj, will be the representative. Henceforth, he will represent me in this affair, beginning from today's function. Now I shall go from here, and he will do the necessary. On my behalf, he will give Harinam, Diksha, Sannyas, and everything. Although we have had our differences with Srila Sridhar Maharaj, this situation invites comparison with ours in 1977. Srila Prabhupada clearly gave the managerial authority of the society to the GBC in his will, and he appointed Ritviks to initiate on his behalf due to being physically incapacitated. This was also the situation with Srila Sridhar Maharaj. According to the desire of my divine master, he says, I have been maintaining this disciplic succession, but it is no longer possible for me, as I am now too old and invalid. He even states that Akshayananda Swami and other Prabhupada disciples associated with him are Ritviks, even after the departure of Srila Prabhupada. Of both Srila Prabhupada and Srila Sridhar Maharaj. They are also Ritvik of Swami Maharaj and also myself. He then further amplifies, henceforth, he, Govinda Maharaj, will represent me in this affair. Henceforth literally means from this time on. Thus, he has indicated, as Srila Prabhupada did, that this arrangement would continue indefinitely.
It is doubtful that Sridhar Maharaj would institute a Ritvik system or that he would speak of its known and acceptable to the Gaudiya Sampradaya. It indicates that Srila Prabhupada's disciples could operate as Ritviks even after the departure of Srila Prabhupada. Anyone who knows something of the history of the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Math knows that many persons were voicing doubts about Govinda Maharaj's qualifications to be an Acharya in the full. Acknowledging such doubts, Srila Sridhar Maharaj grants Govinda Maharaj full managerial authority but makes an arrangement by which initiation you to connect founder Acharya of that Math, Srila Sridhar Maharaj. A question which may arise is that these statements of Srila Sridhar Maharaj
seem to contradict his former advice to the GBC.
However, since Srila Sridhar Maharaj had twice seen the posting of unqualified persons as Acharya result in the Gaudiya Math and in ISKCON, it is probable that he took a page from Srila Prabhupada's book and instituted a Ritvik system to prevent a third misfortune. Srila Prabhupada's wisdom in setting up a Ritvik system is amplified by this example. In summary, the words and testimony of Srila Prabhupada, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Jasodanandan Prabhu, Gauridas Panditas, as well as various documents and letters, and Srila Prabhupada's known process of initiating disciples while he was physically present, all prove that the Ritvik process was the system that Srila Prabhupada consistently maintained, expanded upon, and utilized up to the time of departure, and wished to continue thereafter. Let the critics of this system produce one shred of evidence that the Ritvik system established by Srila Prabhupada unauthorized and could not continue after his departure. We have presented many proofs that it should and was intended to continue. Where is indisputable evidence to the contrary? The onus is on the detractors. Srila Prabhupada never made any gurus, nor did he ever state that anyone was immediately fit to be one. The indications of Scripture are that one must be ordered to be guru by his spiritual master before he can become one. Everyone has a standing order to become guru. That order indicates a progression, however. When one is actually qualified, Krishna or his representative directly orders one to be guru so that one will know it as his certain and unavoidable duty despite any personal reluctance or hesitation. Unless one has been so called and is so qualified, let him, if qualified enough to be appointed by the GBC, be a humble Ritvik on behalf of the greatest exponent of Krishna consciousness who ever lived. That is the greatest honor. That is the authorized system. Let's move briskly.
A brief historical account of the Ritvik system in ISKCON, as was established by Prabhupada, and I
Shall also call on one or two witnesses who can give some personal testimony with respect to statements made by Srila Prabhupada and the Ritvik system. So this system was introduced in 1973. I'm going to read a small from a letter from Swami, which Prabhupada wrote on 4th of January 1973. He says, "So I think you now may be appointed by me to give first initiations to my new disciples by chanting on their beads on my behalf. In America, Kirtanananda Swami is doing that. Now, of you, that will give me great relief. Kirtanananda will chant on the beads for new devotees in America, Canada, like that. You can chant on the beads for the European continent's new disciples. They shall, of course, still be considered my disciples. Not that they shall become your disciples. You will be to chant their beads, and that is the same effect of binding master and disciple as if I were personally chanting." So that empowerment was given to a number of devotees during Prabhupada's physical presence, generally sannyasis. The first was Kirtanananda,
Rebuttinandam, then there are other letters to other persons who were similarly empowered. At any rate, we're more interested in what happened in 1977, but there's the established fact of the system being set up by Srila Prabhupada. In May of 1977, the final Leela of Prabhupada began. On the 17th of May, Srila Prabhupada traveled from Rishikesh to Vrindavan, where he announced that he was soon to leave his body. So, in that month, some discussions began about setting up a Ritvik Acharya. Sometime around the 23rd of May, Srila Prabhupada mentioned to Tamal Krishna Goswami that he would appoint some Ritviks, and I'd like to call on Gauridas Pandit Das to state his recollections of the talks that occurred around that time.
Well, we were in Rishikesh in 1977, May 16th. May 16th, Prabhupada, we were planning to go to Chandigarh in 2 weeks. Prabhupada was not, at that time, planning on leaving the planet. And then there was a big storm that night. And the power was going on and off, lights were going on and off. And me and Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Pradyumna were staying downstairs in the house. And Upendra Prabhu came downstairs and told us at 2:30 in the morning that Prabhupada said that tomorrow we will go to Vrindavan, better to die in Vrindavan. And so we were all shocked at hearing this first information that Prabhupada said he's going to leave the planet. So Pradyumna and myself were sent to Vrindavan to make arrangements for Prabhupada's arrival. And we got there, we woke up Akshayananda Maharaj and before Mangalartik, and we advised him of Prabhupada's statement. And so all the devotees started cleaning Prabhupada's room. And then Prabhupada, I'll keep it short, but he called all the devotees into his room, and he gave a lecture saying that I'm coming here to leave my body, but you should not lament. I've given you everything in my books, and if you simply read my books and cooperate with your God brothers, everything will go on nicely. And he went on speaking, saying devotees were starting to cry and say, Prabhupada, no, you can't leave us. And Prabhupada just said over and over, I am in my books. If you follow my books, read my books, cooperate with your God brothers, everything will go on nicely. And then a few days later, approximately on or around May 23rd, in Prabhupada's garden, Prabhupada, Tamal kept reading Prabhupada letters that these devotees want to get initiated. Temple presidents are writing so many letters. And Prabhupada said, so, I will announce Ritvik Acharyas will initiate disciples on my behalf when I leave the planet. And at the time I was a brahmachari from a very young age. Up till that time, I had a very good memory, clear. I wrote this information to Satsvarup Maharaj in 1978, just a few months after, when I was surprised to see how actually ISKCON came. When we were under the impression that everything Prabhupada said would happen, so there was no controversy at the time. And it wasn't until 1978 that we saw all these changes that I had to write these letters to Satsvarup Maharaj. Anyway, he said, questions were asked by Tamal, Prabhupada, should we put Vyasa sons in the temple room? Prabhupada immediately said, no, that would create enmity among my disciples.
I think we'll come back to that point. That was in June.
It's not available at the archives.
Okay, so I'd like to move on to the 25th of May. At that time, Yashodanandana Das,
Then Swami,
Nanda Goswami, with respect to this Ritvik system. Where are you? Let's have your testimony.
Okay, on the 25th of May at 1 p.m., I'd like to point out that this is definitely not a recreation or a re-remembrance. These are factual notes that were taken while I was engaged in the Gurukul in Vrindavan. These notes were made in pencil, Indian-style pencil, on Indian paper. It is not a re-remembrance. These were factual incidents to the best of my knowledge and belief. And these incidents were not written this year. They were written at that time. On the 25th of May, 1977, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, on or about 1 o'clock, Bhavananda Das, at that time Goswami, comes in the restaurant and greets all the devotees with a brief expose of the situation. Quote, Prabhupada said that now there is no more hope to live. I'm preparing to leave. So I have called all of you and have asked, which I've given to Tamal. I will choose a few of you to take care of the affairs of the society. Keep the work going on.
This movement has attained unprecedented glamour. Now keep up this reputation. Do not turn this institution like the Gaudiya Math. After this conversation, I went and saw Bhavananda Maharaj and told him that I had heard from Smara Haridas at that time, who was my brahmachari assistant, that Smara Hari had heard from Gauridas Pandit that Prabhupada was discussing the nomination of Ritvik Acharyas, and that these discussions took place in the garden. I asked Smara Hari, how did he know of it? He says, well, I've just spoken to Gauridas Pandit, who was recording the conversation. I also approached Tamal Krishna Maharaj about this, and he told me, who told you this? Tamal Krishna Maharaj told me that if Gauridas Pandit has said this, and Smara Hari said, who else knows about this? At that point, I indicated, well, there's only 3 people, and the conversation has been recorded, so what did Prabhupada say? And Tamal Krishna Maharaj says, we're just discussing at that time. Now, Bhavananda Das, I approached him and asked him about it. His understanding of the situation is that this was only a nomination of Ritvik Acharyas at the time. And this is also confirmed by another conversation that took place with the said Bhavananda Das on the 31st of May. Now, these taped conversations with Srila Prabhupada, there is one on the 28th of May, 1977, with the various GBCs. On the 31st of May, 1977, on or about 9:27 a.m., there was a fire sacrifice for Chaitya Guru Das, Prem Yogi Das, and Gopinath Das, who were taking sannyas. And also numerous Gurukul children had been recommended to Srila Prabhupada to become his disciples because we felt that his departure was imminent, and we had arranged his initiations done. At that time, I did the fire sacrifice. Prior to the fire sacrifice, the following conversation took place. Why and Yes. I asked him, what's happening? He replied, this is with Bhavananda Das. Things are being discussed among the GBCs. Prabhupada said that there is a conspiracy among some of the Goswamis in Vrindavan to try to take over Mayapur in Vrindavan. I can't wait. This is exciting. I really like to get involved in this. I like power. YNS. I'll stick to the Gurukul. What is this I heard from Gauri Das about nomination of Ritvik Acharyas? Bhavananda Swami. At that time he was referred as Bhav, as it was common amongst the sannyasis to refer amongst ourselves to a shortened form of our names. Bhav, it just means on behalf of Prabhupada. That's all. YNS. What did you say? There was another comment. He says, I can't wait till we start to do this. I took this as a reference that the movement was going to expand. We were going to preach. Whatever is the interpretation of that comment from Bhavananda Das, he may be free to explain. YNS, what did you say? I was a little shocked. Bhav, oh, come on. Let's do the fire yajna. To account of his reconfirmation, of his understanding of the actual meaning and intent of Srila Prabhupada's conversation, which did occur on the 28th of May.
So there were 2 discussions between Yashodanandana Prabhu and Bhavananda, the 25th of May, 31st of May. The first of the so-called appointment talks took place on the 28th of May. The Satsvarup Maharaj is one of the main protagonists in the conversation with Prabhupada. He asked the first question. However, it appears that after that discussion there was some confusion as to what Prabhupada's actual intention was. So perhaps Rupa Vilas, you could fill us in on that.
Well, according to Satsvarup Maharaj's account, he's recently published an account, there was no confusion in his mind, but he had a conversation with Jayadvaita Maharaj, and since he's here he can confirm that that it was his understanding that the persons who were nominated as Ritviks would later become gurus after the departure of Srila Prabhupada. And Jayadvaita Maharaj pointed out that it may seem perfectly clear to him, but that others might not think it was so clear, and they should get it in writing. Is that basically? Yeah. All right, so then Satsvarup Maharaj took his advice seriously, so he tried to approach Tamal Krishna Maharaj to get this in writing. And this is his own account. I'm just going to read very briefly what happened. He said, anyway, I asked Tamal Krishna Maharaj to please get this in writing. He asked, why? I said, because people will not understand that Prabhupada picked the regular gurus when he named the persons who would initiate while he was still with us. Tamal Krishna Maharaj replied that he himself knew very well what Prabhupada intended, and that was good enough for him. I tried again to ask him to ask Prabhupada to sign something, but Tamal Krishna Maharaj was not willing. So anyway, then he goes through he said, so Prabhupada never signed a paper.
So things were left rather unclear, at least with respect to in Sasarup Maharaj's mind. At any rate, I'll go on to July. We're running out of time. On the 8th of July, the second of the so-called appointment talks took place. On the 9th, a letter was drawn up by Tamal Krishna Goswami to be sent out to the society with respect to the appointment of Ritviks. That you will find 3 or 4 pages from the back of this booklet. July the 9th, 1977, signed by Srila Prabhupada. The 11 names are there. A brief description is given of the process, and the second paragraph, I'll read. Now that Srila Prabhupada has named these representatives, temple presidents may henceforward send recommendation for first and second initiation to whichever of these 11 representatives are nearest their temple. After considering the recommendation, these representatives may accept the devotee as an initiated disciple of Srila Prabhupada by giving a spiritual name. So it's to be noted in this connection that even though this letter was extremely important, a very significant letter signed by Srila Prabhupada, there is no mention of this system being discontinued at any time. No cessation. Had Srila Prabhupada intended this system to be stopped at any time in the near future, I think we can intelligently suppose that he would have had it mentioned in this letter, that he would have said, for the time being, for now, until further notice, or until such time as I depart this world. However, only the word henceforward is to be found. On the 10th of July, as if to confirm our analysis of this letter, Tamal Krishna Goswami spoke to Yashodanandana Das, showing him this letter. We have your testimony on that point, please.
Okay, I'm reading from the original notes. This conversation took place on the 10th of July in the morning. Tamal Krishna Maharaj comes out of Prabhupada's room. I was at that time coming from the Gurukul, having come from the Gurukul building near Prabhupada's garden. I'm using the abbreviated format here. TKG, Haribol. Yashoda, did you see this? YNS, no, what is it? TKG, this is signed by Prabhupada. In parenthesis, he pointed out to Srila Prabhupada's signature in the left-hand bottom corner. I read the entire letter and then asked him, YNS, what does this all mean? TKG, devotees have been writing to Srila Prabhupada asking for initiations, and now Prabhupada has named 11 Ritviks who can initiate on his behalf. Prabhupada said that others can be added, YNS, and when Prabhupada departs, TKG, there'll be Ritviks. That's what Prabhupada said. I would like to point out at this time that I did make a mistake in my original version in the Vedic Village Review. I forgot to mention the following statement by Tamal Krishna Maharaj. It's all on tape. Haribol, I had to return to the Gurukul, deeply thinking of the meaning of the conversation with Maharaj.
So in addition to this official letter signed by Prabhupada and sent out to the society, there were 1 or 2 letters which we've reproduced here, sent out by Tamal Krishna Goswami, Rameshwara Swami also, particularly the letters, I think there were at least 3 or 4 that Tamal Krishna Maharaj sent to various prominent members of the society. One is reproduced here, 3rd page from the back. This is to Kirtanananda Maharaj. If one studies these letters, one will find that similar wording is used from this time on, henceforward, etc., again indicating that there will be no cessation of the system. At any rate, these are the basic historical facts that we have time to present now. There's no doubt that more facts will emerge as time goes on. Therefore, we earnestly urge the GBC to take up this matter, investigate it fully, determine where missing recordings are, if there are such, and thoroughly discussed the matter to the satisfaction of all the members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. We just have to, can we confer for 1 minute here? Sure. What should I present now? Questions. Maybe I'll present some of the questions you want to ask.
We drew up, and before we came here, we drew up a number of questions to various parties in the society. Particularly, we have a list of questions here towards the back for Tamal Krishna Maharaj. Now, I don't know, should I try to read all of those, or just some of them? Or?
As much as you can.
Well, I'll read some of the questions we've composed. We feel these questions do need to be answered in order for us to get a real clarification on this issue, because it does appear that there was some type of clouding of the issue. These are various questions towards the back, I think about 10 pages from the back. Number 1, according to your comment in the Pyramid House talks, there were discussions with Srila Prabhupada about the Ritvik system before the May 28, 1977 meeting. What actually happened was that Prabhupada mentioned that he might be appointing some Ritviks, so the GBC then met for various reasons, and they went to Prabhupada, 5 or 6 of us. This is further confirmed by the opening lines of the May 28th conversation, in which you mentioned the previously unfamiliar term Ritvik. Prabhupada, I shall recommend some of you to act as officiating Acharya, Tamal Krishna Goswami. Is that called Ritvik Acharya? Srila Prabhupada, Ritvik, yes. A. Since it is clear that you had held previous discussions about the Ritvik system with Srila Prabhupada, where are the recordings of those conversations? B. Since such discussions were of crucial importance for the future of ISKCON, if there are no recordings thereof, why aren't there? Quote, this is a quote from an earlier conversation a few days before. Tamal Krishna Goswami, we tape everything Prabhupada says. Everything he says, we tape. Whether you're here or not here, guess, no, I don't want to talk on the machine. Tamal Krishna Goswami, we're not taping for any other purpose, but our Guru Maharaj's words are very sacred to us, so we tape all the time, whether you're here or not. So I just want to confirm that by going through the microfiche, I find that sometimes there were conversations that went on for 8 pages about water connections in Vrindavan, for instance. So the fact that if there was discussion about the Ritvik system, it seems incredible that these things would not have been taped. C. Why has nothing been reported by you about Srila Prabhupada's remarks during those Ritvik conversations? D. According to Gauridas Pandit, there were a number of recorded discussions between you and Srila Prabhupada about the Ritvik system, in which Srila Prabhupada made it clear that this system was also the arrangement for the time after he departed. Do you confirm or deny his statement? 2. Why have you not made public denials of Gauridas Pandit's assertions if in fact they are false? Considering the effects that the statements of Gauridas Pandit would tend to have on the stability of our ISKCON movement, why have you not responded directly? 3. Jasodanandan Prabhu has also stated that you informed him that the Ritvik system would continue even after Srila Prabhupada's departure. Do you confirm or deny his report? So I won't read that part again, we've heard it. 4. In light of the many conversations you had with Srila Prabhupada about Sridhar Maharaj, why did you suggest to the GBC in 1978 that Sridhar Maharaj be consulted on the sensitive topic of the Guru, knowing well that Srila Prabhupada credited him with the downfall of the Gaudiya Math due to his insistence on creating an Acharya? Due to his insistence on creating an Acharya. Now, I have some confirmation. Do you want to speak briefly on this? That it was his idea that someone be sent to Sridhar Maharaj?
Yes, in 1978, at the Mayapur festival, I was living with Tamal Krishna Goswami, Bhagavan Das, and Guru Kripa on top of the room that's on top of the building opposite the temple. And at that time, there were numerous discussions regarding how the system will be implemented in our movement. And both Bhagavan Das and Guru Kripa asked Tamal Krishna Maharaj, well, if there are many questions which we do not seem to have satisfactory answers, what should we do? Tamal Krishna Maharaj then said, Prabhupada said that we can go to see Sridhar Maharaj regarding those type of questions. Then Tamal Krishna turned to me and says, Yashodanandan Prabhu, you're always, Maharaj at that time, you're always interested in these kinds of philosophical issues. Why don't you go over to see Sridhar Maharaj and ask him those kinds of philosophical questions? And I said, are you sure that's what you want me to do? Prabhupada said that. And he confirmed to me in front of Guru Kripa and Bhagavan Das that this is what Prabhupada had said. Now I'm sure there has been numerous versions of Prabhupada's statements regarding Sridhar Maharaj's permission, that Prabhupada had said that we can go to see Sridhar Maharaj, but this is exactly what Tamal Krishna Maharaj told me in 1978 at the Mayapur festival.
All right, there were many talks held in Mayapur and Bombay on this topic of associating with Sridhar Maharaj, and you were present for them. More than any other disciple, you knew the expressed attitudes of Srila Prabhupada about Sridhar Maharaj's role in artificially creating acharyas, which led to the dissolution of the Gaudiya Math. In the light of all of those discussions, as well as the many statements in Srila Prabhupada's books about the breakup of the Gaudiya Math, with which you are also surely familiar, why did you suggest to the GBC that they should approach Sridhar Maharaj about the Guru issue, knowing so well his attitudes and likely suggestions? So I've just given a brief excerpt from a conversation which illustrates his knowledge of the history of the breakup of the Gaudiya Math and Sridhar Maharaj's role in that here. So to save time, I'm going to skip over that. You can read that on your own. Number 5, were you aware of the letter from Srila Prabhupada to Rupanuga Prabhu written in 1974 at the time you suggested consulting Sridhar Maharaj? Number 6, Srila Prabhupada stated that Sridhar Maharaj was learned. Did he ever specifically state that he should be consulted about how to carry on the disciplic succession, that is, organize and institute a system for gurus and initiations in ISKCON? What is the evidence for this? Is there any specific recorded evidence that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to consult Sridhar Maharaj on philosophical and managerial issues? Number 7, who conveyed the idea to the GBC that Srila Prabhupada had exclusively appointed 11 successor gurus, since in fact Srila Prabhupada had never appointed anything more than Ritviks and had not established in writing anything other than a Ritvik Acharya system? How did the GBC come to the conclusion of a successor Acharya system? Accepting your statement from the Pyramid House talks that there was never a guru appointment and that one is never guru by appointment but by qualification, the GBC to appoint 11 acharyas, or for that matter to approve or appoint dozens. In Srila Prabhupada's presence, you said that we cannot become guru because we are all conditioned souls. This refers to a conversation in April of 1977. Because we are all conditioned souls. And Srila Prabhupada agreed. Why is it then that in the physical absence of Srila Prabhupada, you say we need not be liberated to be guru? The final question. In May 24th, 25th, 1977, you helped to draft Srila Prabhupada's will. In that will we find the following, quote, the executive directors who have herein been designated are appointed for life. In the event of the death or failure to act for any reason of any of the said directors, a successor director or directors may be appointed by the remaining directors, provided the new director is my initiated disciple, following strictly all the rules and regulations of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness as detailed in my books, and provided that there are never less than 3 or more than 5 executive directors acting at one time. End of the quote. The obvious question which arises even upon a superficial reading of this statement is what would happen when all of Srila Prabhupada's disciples were dead? There would, according to our current system of initiations, be no further possibility of appointing an initiated disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Why wasn't this statement amended or questioned? Unless it was understood that Srila Prabhupada would continue to have initiated disciples for a long time to come through the Ritvik system, the above would seem to put our society's future in a precarious position. I just made a note here. Maybe this is obvious to everyone, but I'll present it anyway, and then we'll bring it to a close. Note, there appears to be only 4 possible understandings, the first 3 of them improbable or preposterous. 1. Srila Prabhupada was not concerned with the long-term future of his society. 2. Srila Prabhupada expected his society to expire with his disciples. 3. Srila Prabhupada was confused. 4. Srila Prabhupada expected to have disciples for generations to come. So that's 5 minutes. 5 minutes? How many of them?
Which one is this?
The questions, not the...
All right.
Which one's the, just the questions.
Okay, I'll just, I have 5 more minutes, so I'll just raise a few other questions that we would like to see addressed at some point, either here in this proceeding or in the future. These are questions for Ravinda Swarup Prabhu, because I understand he's going to be writing a paper to try to establish the proper Siddhanta about Guru Tattva. So we've raised in this booklet about about 19 questions, which we think would be very appropriate to be addressed on the issue of Guru. So first one, what is the evidence that the GBC is authorized to appoint or approve Diksha Gurus? 2, quote specific, incontrovertible, and extensive evidence from Srila Prabhupada's books and the writings of the previous acharyas that the Diksha Guru need not be self-realized. 3, what evidence do we have that the Ritvik Acharya system is unauthorized or inappropriate, given the following statements made or authorized by Srila Prabhupada? So I won't read those at this time, we've already been through them. 4, in the light of Srila Prabhupada's comments on April 22nd, 1977, about his disciples' lack of qualification to be Guru, at what point did they become qualified? So that's that famous April 22nd conversation. And I'll read that quickly. You become, Srila Prabhupada, you become Guru, but you must be qualified first of all. Then you become. What is the use of producing some rascal Guru? Tamal Krishna Goswami, well, I have studied myself and all of your disciples, and it's clear fact that we are all conditioned souls, so we cannot be Guru. Maybe one day it may be possible. Srila Prabhupada, Tamal Krishna Goswami, but not now. Srila Prabhupada, yes, I shall produce some Gurus. I shall say who is Guru. Now you become Acharya. You become authorized. I am waiting for that. You become all Acharya. I retire completely. But the training must be complete. Tamal Krishna Goswami, the process of purification must be there. Srila Prabhupada, oh yes, must be there. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wants that. Amara Abhyay Guru Haya. You become Guru, but be qualified. Laughs. Little thing. Strictly follow it. Tamal Krishna Goswami, not rubber stamp. Srila Prabhupada, then you'll not be effective. You can cheat, but it will not be effective.
Evidence is being presented. What's the quality of the evidence? What counter evidence is there? The topic, of course, is what system Srila Prabhupada instituted in regard to initiations after his departure. Toward the end of the presentation you just heard, a lot was said about the qualification of a person who serves as Guru, whether he has to be liberated or whether less than that is adequate. This is a question I don't propose to deal with, because it's not the question on the floor. The question on the floor is, what system did Srila Prabhupada institute? If he instituted a Ritvik Guru system, then the question about the qualification of Guru is not urgent. We can put it off. The main business is to get these Ritviks in place. On the other hand, the question of the qualification of Guru, whether he has to be liberated and so on, that becomes urgent only if your other premise is wrong. Only if Prabhupada didn't institute a Ritvik Guru system for initiation after his departure. If you're wrong, then it becomes an urgent question. Who's qualified to initiate after Prabhupada? If you're right, the Ritvik Guru system is the system, we can talk about those other things later. So the question I'm going to deal with is the question of the Ritvik Guru system. Is this what Srila Prabhupada wanted? Now, what's the evidence that's been put forward to the effect that it was? We've had detailed evidence to the effect that Srila Prabhupada, during his presence, put in effect a Ritvik Guru system, starting back from the days of Rebadi Nandan Maharaj, and Prabhupada authorizing people to chant on beads, and continuing up through the time when he was saying, it doesn't matter, you don't have to consult me, whoever you think is all right, initiate him, give him a name, put the name in my book. The evidence is uncontrovertible, it's thorough, it's exhaustive, it's accepted by just about everyone. We don't intend to argue that. Srila Prabhupada didn't appoint anyone to become a guru for the future. He appointed Ritviks to initiate in his presence. That much is accepted by everyone. Now, the extension of that is that these Ritviks were supposed to initiate Prabhupada's disciples in the future after Prabhupada's disappearance. That's what's at issue. And that's what Prabhupada is supposed to have firmly set in place before his departure. Now let's see what the evidence is for that. We have, first of all, a memory from Gauridas Pandit of one conversation that he overheard. We have a memory from Yashodanandan that Gauridas Pandit told him that this is what he'd overheard. And we have a memory from Yashodanandan Prabhu that Tamal Krishna Maharaj had said that this would be the system in the future. Now, all right, these are memories. They go back far. I don't think I want to get into detailing the quality of that testimony. I'll simply point out something which has been amply pointed out by Rupa Vilas Prabhu, namely that even persons who are being put forward as gurus at the moment may have 4 defects: a tendency to make mistakes, tendency to fall into illusion, imperfect senses, and a cheating propensity. If you're prepared to argue that even the present leaders of the Krishna consciousness movement have these 4 propensities, I assume that you're unwilling to exempt Yashodanandan Prabhu and Gauridas Pandit from those 4 same defects. Okay. So we have these brief memories, one sentence from Tamal remembered and one sentence from Srila Prabhupada allegedly remembered. We then have 2 sentences severed from their context in the so-called appointment tapes. That is, I shall appoint some of you to be officiating acharya. Is that called Ritvik? Yes. This is essentially the totality of Srila Prabhupada's statements on the matter that we have available to us. The totality of Srila Prabhupada's statements on the matter that we have available to us in recorded form. I shall appoint some of you. Is that called Ritvik? Yes. Finished. Later in the same conversation, we find, well, I'll come back to that later. No, I won't come back to it. I'm going to deal with it right now. Later in this same tape, we find Srila Prabhupada saying, they are his disciples who is initiating, his grand disciples. The comment from Rupa Vilas Prabhu is, this statement by itself is hard to follow. I submit that this statement by itself is easy to follow. Spiritual master, disciple, grand disciple. It's very clear what's being talked about. You can't have a grand disciple unless the spiritual master initiated a disciple and that disciple initiated his disciple. That's how you get disciples, grand disciples, great-grand disciples, great-great-great-great-grand disciples, and so on. That comes up in the same conversation referred to. And Rupa Vilas's way with dealing with it is to say, gee, this is hard to follow, isn't it? I submit that it's not. What other evidence is there? There's a letter to Kirtanananda Swami from Tamal Krishna Maharaj in which much has been made of the word henceforward, which means from now till some indeterminate time in the future. And it's alleged, without much to go with it, that this meant, this was probably another definitive statement, another really impressive piece of evidence that this was supposed to go on till eternity. Finally, we have the final, we have some final dicta, some final words from Sripad B.R. Sridhar Maharaj. What impresses me about the evidence, about this piece of evidence, is that it indicates how desperate you are for evidence. If I'm looking for evidence, the last evidence I'm going to use is evidence from a person I previously blasted all over my publication. After I previously argued that we've made the greatest mistake in the world by going to this person, that he's unfit in so many ways, to then go back and say, and here's some really good evidence for you. My goodness, what does it mean about the evidence available? It means that it's scanty as anything, and you're reaching the bottom of the barrel. By that, I don't mean to discredit Sripad Sridhar Maharaj by saying when you go to evidence that you've rejected, or from a source you've rejected, and then come back and say, well, here's a good source of evidence, what does it mean? Either you accept a source of evidence as an authority, or you reject it. You don't pick and choose at your whim. Now, counter evidence. The first question that might legitimately be asked is put by Rupa Vilas Prabhu. It appears on page 10 of Vedic Village Review. The first challenge to a Ritvik system may come. What is the precedent for such an arrangement in our Gaudiya Sampradaya? To look at, that's about as much as I'm going to quote. I'm going to quote one more sentence. What's the precedent for such an arrangement in our Gaudiya Sampradaya? And the answer given is, in reply, we must all admit insufficient knowledge of our Sampradaya history to authoritatively and completely answer such a question. Now, when you say that a little bit more pointedly, what it is there is none. What's the evidence for a precedent? There is none. We haven't come up with any, period. And it leaves room that perhaps in the future, at some other time undesignated, there might be evidence forthcoming. Everyone knows what Srila Prabhupada's policy was on post-dated checks. We do not accept them. And we regard it as evidence of bluffing. There is no precedent. That's the straightforward answer. We have no precedent. Then the next argument made is, Srila Prabhupada did many unprecedented things. That's true. Srila Prabhupada can do many unprecedented things. That's also true. But to argue that Srila Prabhupada can do something unprecedented is not the same as arguing that he did something unprecedented. You have to prove it. Srila Prabhupada could have appointed zebras to initiate in the future. He can do anything. He could eat the whole world. But he didn't. So there is no precedent mentioned. And it's not enough just to say, well, Prabhupada could have done it if he'd wanted to. Now, next. What's the standard understanding? Okay. What's the standard understanding that existed in Srila Prabhupada's time about disciplic succession? There might be some argument made that in Prabhupada's time we all understood there was going to be a Ritvik Guru system dating back from the days of Rebharinandan Swami's appointment to chant on beads. Let's look at what the real system was. I propose that what was understood in Prabhupada's time, what was understood before Prabhupada's time, the standard understanding of disciplic succession implied in the very words is that after the departure of your spiritual master, you initiate. After one generation comes the next generation, then the next generation, then the next generation. That was my understanding from 1968 till 1977, and I consider myself fairly safe in saying that that was the general understanding. Why do I consider myself safe in saying it? Where did we get that understanding? We didn't know anything when we came to ISKCON. Where did we get this understanding about disciplic succession? We got it from Prabhupada. Now, let's examine some misunderstanding from the past which may illuminate things further. I'm going back to August 1968, where Chutananda Maharaj had apparently proposed to Srila Prabhupada that he himself could initiate disciples. The first thing I warn Chutananda, do not try to initiate. You are not in proper position now, 1968, to initiate anyone. Besides that, the etiquette is that so long the spiritual master is present, all prospective disciples should be brought to him. That's August 21st, 68. Now, the next time this comes up is 1971. Here's a letter to John Milner. So far as you're taking initiation from Brahmananda Maharaj, I have no objection. You've got punitive damages here?
It's underneath this one.
Yeah, we'll just put this to the side for now. Thank you. So far as you're taking initiation from Brahmananda Maharaj, I have no objection. But it is the etiquette that in the presence of one spiritual master, one does not accept disciples. In this connection, Swami Brahmananda may write to me, and I will instruct him. Now we move on down the line to 1972. Apparently things have looked up a little bit for Achyutananda Maharaj. Prabhupada says, "Some time ago, you asked my permission for accepting some disciples. Now the time is approaching very soon when you will have many disciples by your strong preaching work. Stick to the line of our strong preaching method, and many misguided persons will be blessed by your proper guiding." Then we come to 1974. In 1974, some interesting things started happening. Some of our God brothers began jumping the gun. We found pictures appearing on altars in New Vrindavan of Kirtanananda Swami. We found pictures of Hansadutta Swami in Germany. And this resulted in a conversation which I haven't found anywhere, but which I think some of you will remember, where Prabhupada begins, "Now there is some tendency in our society to become guru." Long silence. And what Srila Prabhupada goes on to say is essentially what's here in this letter to Hansadutta, dated October 1st, 1974. "I have heard that there is some worship of yourself by the other devotees. Of course, it is proper to offer obeisances to a Vaishnava, but not in the presence of the spiritual master. After the departure of the spiritual master, it will come to that stage. But now, wait. Otherwise, it will create factions." Now, the final quotation is one that I'd like to give from 1975, which is pretty well along, considerably after various people had been empowered to initiate on beads and perform fire sacrifices and so on. And that's the quotation that is here on the board. It's to one devotee, Tusta Krishna Maharaj. Prabhupada says, yeah, go ahead. "There's a matter of etiquette," he says. You can bring it forward. "There's a matter of etiquette. It is the custom that during the lifetime of your spiritual master, you bring the prospective disciples to him. And in his absence or disappearance, you can accept disciples without any limitation. This is the law of disciplic succession." That's clear. That's definite. That's in writing. That's the law. Now, the final point I'd like to make is I'd like to pick up a quotation that Rupa Vilas Prabhu apparently thought makes a point that's very well taken. It's a quotation from Tamal Krishna Maharaj, which he repeats or paraphrases several times in his argumentation. And here it is. Tamal Krishna is arguing that Srila Prabhupada did not, in fact, appoint people to become initiating spiritual masters after him. That he simply appointed Ritviks to initiate in his presence. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj says, and that's all that it was. And it was never any more than that. If it had been more than that, you can bet your bottom dollar that Prabhupada would have spoken for days and hours and weeks on end about how to set up this thing with the gurus. But he didn't. because he had already said it 1,000,000 times. So that's my case. There's no precedent for doing what's talked about here, Ritvik Guru system after the departure of the spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada never gave a clear instruction that we should do any such thing. Rather, he clearly repeated what had been the standard understanding all along, not only for 10 years in ISKCON, but for thousands of years in the Vaishnava Sampradayas, that the disciple initiates his disciple, that disciple initiates his disciple, and on and on and on it goes. And if Prabhupada had wanted to change it, you can bet your bottom dollar he would have spoken about it for days and days and hours and hours.
I'd like to, it's a hard act to follow, but I'd like to, and that's the essence of the case that we have to put forward here. I would like to, however, go back to the appointment tape, because that's, to me, that's a recorded conversation with Srila Prabhupada beyond the vagaries of people's memories. And a delegation was present, so it wasn't particularly relative to the persons he was talking to. So on November 1st, I sent out a circular to the temples about this tape and pointed to this line, which to me I felt was decisive. Prabhupada discussing Ritvik, Satyarup Das Goswami, but he does it on your behalf. Yes, he says, that is formality. Because in my presence one should not become guru, so on my behalf. So that's just one line there about Ritvik. That is formality. Because in my presence one should not become guru, so on my behalf. So this is citing, again, this is a citation that we have here. It is the custom that during the lifetime of the spiritual master you bring the prospective disciple to him. Formality means custom. And in his absence or disappearance you can accept disciples without any limitation. This is the law of disciplic succession. So from here we see when Prabhupada is asked about this Ritvik, he explicitly ties this Ritvik system to his presence. That's in this same tape. Now there's a response to this from Vedic Village Review, a long response, but I think the core of it's here. It is said here, I think Karnamrita Prabhu wrote this, he, that is myself, makes much of Srila Prabhupada's referring to his presence and concludes that there were Ritviks precisely because Srila Prabhupada was present physically and not otherwise. Well, that's true. That's what I say, and I do make much of it. But then Rabindra was assuming that these persons were actually fit to be gurus and that that would be their function when Srila Prabhupada was not present. This conclusion can only be arrived at if this section is considered out of context. However, to begin with, he has neglected the first exchange of the conversation. How will initiations go on in your absence? Prabhupada, I will appoint some officiating acharyas. So here the case, there's actually 2 points that are being made. One is that I ignore the beginning of the conversation. Well, this is because this argument is really based on taking the beginning of the conversation as the whole conversation, in effect. That when the question is asked, how will initiations go on after your departure? Prabhupada says, yes, I shall recommend some of you. After this is settled up, I shall recommend some of you to act as officiating acharyas. That's it, case closed, there it is. But the conversation goes on. The conversation goes on. And if you take this as Srila Prabhupada's answer, then you have to account for that immediately afterwards, yes, that is formality because in my presence, he contradicts himself. He contradicts himself. So you're foisting a contradiction on Srila Prabhupada by this reading. But therefore, you cannot accept this first part of the exchange as the entire exchange. We know that when somebody asks a question, often in the give and take of conversation, it took some time for Prabhupada's complete answer to come out. That's what happened here. If you take the matter that way, the thrust of Prabhupada's answer is something like this. How shall initiations go on after your departure, Prabhupada? I shall begin by selecting some of you to act for now as Ritvik Acharyas. I shall begin by selecting some of you to initiate on my behalf while I am present. This is the etiquette. After my departure, however, you are permitted to become regular gurus, initiating your own disciples, but don't think that you become a qualified guru simply by appointment or automatic right of inheritance. You must be actually qualified by submission, surrender, and service to your own spiritual master. That's a purportful expansion, putting everything together. And here it's clear, it's coherent, it's simple, there's no contradictions, it's in line with Prabhupada has already told us, always told us, about the way disciplic successions go on. So there's no reason to excite this tape. It is not evidence that Prabhupada wanted a posthumous Ritvik system. And that's the crucial question, whether it's posthumous or not. Not that he already had a Ritvik system, in effect, that we know he was doing. The second part of the argument is that I was assuming that these people were fit to become gurus. No. I'm just assuming Prabhupada said what he said, and we have to hear what he said. He says, in fact, the charge is not that, the charge is simply that I make much of this sentence in this conversation. I'm supposed to ignore it. I'm supposed to pretend it doesn't exist because it contradicts the thesis of Vedic Village Review. But it's there. And that's what Prabhupada says. Whether or not they're fit people is another discussion, because there is an alternative. And what the Vedic Village Review people have been doing is setting us up with a false dilemma. And they're saying, you have to choose. Either Prabhupada instituted a posthumous Ritvik system, or all these people were fit to become gurus. Choose. But that's not the dilemma at all. That's not the alternative. There are other alternatives. In fact, you may remember, if I may show you, those of you who are familiar with the history of this controversy, that in 1981, widely circulated around the movement, was this the bona fide spiritual master and the disciple. These are often referred to as the Jadharani papers. She was the main distributor, apparently not just a main author. Yashodanandana apparently was participated in the authoring of some of these things. And here they consider a number of alternatives, including the idea of posthumous Ritvik system. And it's rejected for what seems to me fairly good arguments in here. In fact, that's, I thought, that would be the last we saw of that. The authors of this paper advocate not taking Diksha until there's a bona fide Acharya. They were also of the opinion that the only one authorized to give Diksha was Mahabhagavata, and that we should simply await for the appearance of such a Mahabhagavata before Diksha goes on. That's another alternative. And that, to me, is much more in line with what I've learned from Srila Prabhupada, that there is no bona fide guru. Pray to Krishna to send you one. That's what you should do. But by setting up this false dilemma, this point isn't argued for, so now everybody's thinking they have to choose between these 2 points. Either all the people that were named as Ritviks, Prabhupada thought they were fit to give initiation, or he instituted a system of posthumous Ritviks. No, that doesn't follow at all. The question is simply, what did Srila Prabhupada say? What did he authorize? And I submit that the burden of proof is on our friends from New Jaipur. because it is another radical change. We have no evidence that it's there in tradition. It certainly goes against everything Srila Prabhupada ever told us about the parampara system. And what he's saying with this posthumous Ritvik system is, look, I'm going to suspend the disciplic succession. After my departure, the disciplic succession will be put on hold. Maybe forever. If you take the reading of Srila Prabhupada's will, the way Rupa Vilas would like us to, it means forever, because obviously if you have to be Prabhupada's initiated disciple, no future acharya's disciples can also be property trustees. So from that we can understand that maybe it'll go on forever. So Prabhupada is saying, at least indefinitely, until someone gets the call and whatever is the acharya, I'm suspending the disciplic succession. Now, I think we would have known about that. I don't think it would have been something that was so subtle that even one person could have covered up. Because the effort here is to find a villain, Tamal Krishna Goswami, and say that by his machinations and artful and designing ways, one person managed to cover up Srila Prabhupada's instructions. I think if Prabhupada wanted there to be this Ritvik Acharya system posthumously, we would have already known, because he was changing everything he had taught us up until now about parampara and disciplic succession. And so I say the burden of proof has to be to show us where the order is clearly from Srila Prabhupada. The best that they can make out from the appointment tape is that it is contradictory and hence inconclusive. That's the best that could be done. Otherwise, there's no evidence to support such a monumental change in the way things have been done in the past. This is what we would expect. I think that's all I want to say around here. Okay. Thank you very much.
So we're going to resume at exactly 5 minutes after 12. And I would request everybody to come and take your seats in 10 minutes, so we'll be ready to start. During the break, if you've written out questions, give them to Naveen Krishna Prabhu so we can start sorting through them. Okay, thank you.
We're only trying to open up the discussion and finally decide, how we can go about actually resolving it.
Yeah, that's good.
No additions. However, I do have this suggestion for you, that I think if there are points that you want to comment on and so forth, you can give yourself the opportunity by writing astute questions, which you can even direct at yourselves, okay?
Okay. What was that? One thing I'd like to point out to you in the beginning, you mentioned that it would be inappropriate to mention the period between 77 and 1987. I can appreciate the mood of that. I'm not interested in one thing. However, I think that certain points will have to be raised, especially if there are some points that are new. You should take one or two questions from early. This is my question. I should be given a chance. I'm sure some people have raised it. Why I'm going to understand. I'm going to have to make certain statements about why they found it or not. There are very good reasons for that. And once we give them a court
It's out of my hands now. It's in the hands of the moderator. And you can request to make this.
Well, the reason I wanted to ask, I'm going to write the question was, why are you ignoring the evidence that's brought forward in your Baba's book? I'm going to ask that. Why is it being ignored?
That's a good question.
Why is it being totally ignored?
You're on candid camera.
I've also discussed with the parties here that I know we can't come to an entirely satisfactory conclusion here because points have been raised, they want to reply to points and like that, but we've agreed to follow now this question and answer format, and we hope that it will at least achieve our stated purpose today of giving the issues a decent airing so we can give some thought about what should be done in the future on this. So the format, what we're going to do here is we're going to read out the questions, and I'll address one of the parties to answer the question first, and then the other party will have a chance to respond. We're going to give a 5-minute maximum time to answer the questions. Mahashringa Prabhu, the Sergeant-at-Arms, will be over at that end there, and he's going to time your responses. And he will raise his hands at 4.5 minutes. You get a 4.5-minute warning. If you want more time, if you feel it's really important that there is such a complicated question that you couldn't possibly answer it in 5 minutes, request more time at the chairman's discretion. You may or may not get it. Also, if you have you're answering a question and I feel that you're repeating yourselves or you've already answered it sufficiently, I may ask you to stop at that point and we'll continue onwards. We're getting many, many questions here. I'm sure more than we can ever possibly handle in the next hour and a half or so. So the first question will begin with an answer from Rupa Vilas Prabhu. Why did Prabhupada put all the emphasis in his books on bona fide guru if a bona fide guru is so impossible to find? Haven't you admitted yourself that Prabhupada didn't even hardly mention Ritvik in his books?
Certainly Prabhupada put his emphasis on bona fide guru in his books, and we are meant to be connected to a bona fide guru. However, the evidence that has come to our attention is that in the final years, Srila Prabhupada didn't, although he had great hopes for his disciples, he didn't find that they were very qualified as gurus. And this was evidenced especially in this conversation that was made less than a month before the appointment tape with Tamal Krishna Maharaj, in which Tamal Krishna Maharaj gave his analysis that all of us are conditioned souls. We're not qualified to be gurus, and Prabhupada agreed with him. Yes. That hopefully in the future they would become qualified. So the point is that at Prabhupada's departure, we were not bereft of the association of a qualified, bona fide spiritual master, because the bona fide spiritual master was certainly Srila Prabhupada, who lives forever in sound, as he also said many times, that he would live forever in his books, that he would live forever in his tapes and his instructions, and the follower would live with him. And this is also a very authorized system in our Sampradaya, that the predecessor, the words, the specific words and teachings of the predecessor acharyas are our life and soul. And that we may take shelter of those predecessor acharyas. We may be instructed by them. We may be purified by them. We may be blessed by them. Obstacles may be removed by them. This is Srila Prabhupada's position, that he was Lord Chaitanya's chosen representative to carry Lord Chaitanya's movement throughout the entire world. And he left sufficient shiksha, instruction. As shiksha guru, he's existing eternally in his books. And no one is barred from that connection by the simple fact of time that he took birth later on after Prabhupada's departure. No one is deprived of the association of a Mahabhagavat like Srila Prabhupada by his simply giving up his body. That association is eternal. In fact, there was a conversation which we did print in Vedic Village Review a little while back that some of you may remember, where someone was raising to him this point about living guru. Prabhupada was talking about how someone could accept Lord Jesus Christ as their guru. In fact, on a number of occasions, as Jagajivan in Delhi. Do you know that story? There was an incident where one of Prabhupada's disciples was sitting with Prabhupada in Delhi, and this question was raised about Jesus Christ. Could people still accept him as a spiritual master? And Prabhupada said, yes, there's no harm in this. But, he said, the problem is they don't follow. The same thing in this conversation that we reprinted in this issue, the question was raised about Jesus Christ. He said, the disciple is saying, but I was referring to a living guru. And Prabhupada practically began to sputter. Living? It is not a question of, he said, spiritual master is eternal. Spiritual master is eternal. So the point is, we are not bereft of the association of a bona fide spiritual master at any time. And Prabhupada made this point, there is no question of being without a spiritual master. Spiritual master, you are never without a spiritual master. So this idea that we are somehow bereft of a bona fide spiritual master is one of the most nonsense ideas that's ever been propagated. We are never bereft without, we are never without the association of a bona fide spiritual master. This idea is actually insidious. There's no question of being bereft of the association of a bona fide spiritual master at any time in history. It's never happened, and it never will happen. Anyway, that's my rather heated response.
Okay, thank you. Your reply? Yeah, the topic is, did Srila Prabhupada institute a Ritvik system? And the question that's been raised here is, if he instituted a Ritvik system, why didn't he put it in his books? Why did he just talk about bona fide guru and not say anything about Ritviks? And the answer is that we don't have an answer. That's the answer. The answer is that that question cannot be answered by the proponents of the Ritvik guru system. Why didn't Prabhupada put it in his books? Because Prabhupada didn't have any interest in instituting such a system. Period.
Question for Rabindra Jayadvaita Swami. Does your presentation given today represent the opinions of all the GBC members? And secondly, does your presentation represent the final conclusions of the GBC on this matter?
Go ahead, you can speak first.
There are two questions. Do I represent the GBC? No. Does what I say represent the final conclusions of the GBC? No.
Okay. Now, a question for Jayadvaita Swami, and there's also a kind of a converse question for Rupa Vilas that you can think about. For Jayadvaita Maharaj, if Rupa Vilas's evidence, the evidence they presented, could be proven true, would you then concede their point of view? That they could actually be absolutely certain that Prabhupada actually said these things about Ritvik, would you concede their point, or would you still think that another conclusion is the appropriate and correct one? And for Rupa Vilas, if some or all of your evidence was proven incorrect or couldn't be satisfactorily substantiated, would you still stick to your position? Or do you feel that there's so much logic and reason to it that you could substantiate it even without your evidence?
Right. If their position were proven true, would I concede to it? I'd not only concede to it, I'd endorse it, I'd offer my humble obeisances, and I'd send in for my subscription to Vedic Village Review.
We'll send you one anyway. Well, you repeat the question again that I'm supposed to answer.
If some or all of your evidence was proven incorrect or couldn't be satisfactorily substantiated, would you still stick to your position just based on logic and reason?
Okay, if some of the evidence was proven incorrect, some if it means like one detail or one particular conversation or something like that, then I would probably be reluctant to completely give it up as a as the actual position. But if all of it was disproven, obviously I would have to be a madman to continue to profess it.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you. Aren't we falling into the same trap as the Jews by, quote, waiting for the Messiah? Hasn't the Messiah, Srila Prabhupada, already imparted a disciplic succession by saying, you become guru?
This is a nice point on the question of becoming. So our thesis is that we are not advocating the end of the disciplic succession. Now, what did Ravindra Prabhu call it? The suspension of the disciplic succession. This is it's a kind of a straw man argument because we're not advocating the suspension of it. What we are advocating is the continuance of it, that Prabhupada appointed Ritvik Acharyas. Ritvik Acharya is also a kind of guru. It's not that Ritvik Acharya is not an Acharya. He's also an Acharya who's specifically empowered for certain functions. And those functions have to do with the formalities of initiation. So we're not in any way advocating the suspension of the disciplic succession. Could you just repeat the question one more time? I don't want to leave any points out this time. You guys wait to nail me the last time.
Aren't we falling into the same traps of the Jews by waiting for the Messiah? Hasn't the Messiah, Srila Prabhupada, already imparted disciplic succession by saying, you become guru?
Yeah, so I would agree that we're not waiting for the Messiah. The Messiah has come, Srila Prabhupada, and he has created a system by which one can go on being connected to him very easily, the Ritvik Acharya system. Now, as far as becoming guru, we say that's a process. It may be that it's a formality, that you don't accept disciples in the presence of your spiritual master. But it is not a formality to become guru. Becoming guru is a question of qualification. Becoming guru means qualified guru. It doesn't mean that automatically, due to some ecclesiastical convention, that at the time of the disappearance of the spiritual master, that one automatically becomes a guru. That's not an automatic process. It is a question of qualification. And those qualifications are described in Srila Prabhupada's books in great detail. And the fact of the matter is that the overwhelming preponderance of evidence and information is that guru means liberated, Paramahansa, Uttama, Adhikari, Mahabhagavat. That is the definition of guru. And let me ask this question, perhaps it's rhetorical, but let's ask this question. Who had such an understanding while Srila Prabhupada was on this planet, that guru is something other than a liberated person? No one had this understanding. In fact, we understood that guru meant liberated, self-realized soul. But rather, what we've seen since the departure of Srila Prabhupada is that in the absence of persons with sufficient qualification, we've evolved elaborate rationalizations of the philosophy to substantiate something which doesn't exist. And that is a spiritual master who is not a liberated person. A spiritual master, in fact, we find, for instance, in some of the GBC resolutions, that one may become a guru simply if he has the qualification of having not fallen down within the last 5 years. As if this was a scriptural analysis of the bona fide spiritual master. Another qualification of guru. For 10 years, you have to have been chanting Holy Hare Krishna 16 rounds a day and following the regulative principles. These, I beg to submit, are the qualifications of disciples, not gurus. Guru's qualification is something much more. Now, there may be a few statements, and I would submit in Prabhupada's books, if we want to limit the discussion to the law books for 10,000 years, in Prabhupada's books there may be a handful of statements which say that which give some indications there's something, some creature which is described that is something less than a self-realized soul who can be guru. But there are pages, there are hundreds of quotes which will assert that the guru must be a liberated self-realized personality. So when you go to interpret or try to determine the qualifications of a spiritual master, you have to go to the preponderance of the evidence, and any exceptional statements have to be explained in terms of that preponderance of evidence, and not that the particular statements which are in the minority are to be explained by the other way around. But to make that a little clearer, what I'm saying is that you cannot take exceptional statements and make that the rule. You have to take the preponderance of evidence and explain those exceptional statements in the light of the preponderance of evidence. So that's the answer.
You want to hear the question again?
I'm not sure that was entirely on the point.
To the topic.
I want to say the same thing, that essentially for the second time in a row, you've gone from the topic, whether or not Srila Prabhupada wanted a Ritvik system, to another topic, whether or not the guru has to be a liberated soul, which is simply not the topic on the agenda. It appears that you're running for what you feel might be the high ground, and abandoning what might seem to be the low ground. Defend the low ground. Prove that Srila Prabhupada... Pardon me. Prove that Srila Prabhupada instituted a Ritvik system, come up with substantial evidence, and that's the kind of thing that'll make me surrender and send in my subscription and so on. Otherwise, if you switch the topic to a different one time after time, I lose interest.
Yeah, I think I did answer the question. What I was trying to say is that, if you could just again read the question.
Aren't we falling into the same trap as the Jews by waiting for the Messiah?
So the answer to that was no. That the Messiah has already come, and the rest of it?
Hasn't the Messiah, Srila Prabhupada, already instituted a disciplic succession?
Yes, the Ritvik Acharya system is the interim system, and when one becomes a qualified spiritual master, that will be how the disciplic succession continues. That was my point. Now, I'm sorry it wasn't clear to you.
Next question. You can begin answering this. It has been suggested that the Ritvik system was established by Srila Prabhupada in 1973 with Rebharinandana Swami. However, it seems obvious that in 1977, Srila Prabhupada is making some adjustment of whatever system was operating up to that point. What do you feel were the fundamental adjustments being made in 1977, if any?
Seems in 1977, the change was they no longer had to write to him for confirmation with the names of the candidates for initiation. That was the change. Otherwise, people had for some time, other people had been chanting on the beads. And also the other thing was somebody else was giving the name. Although when Prabhupada was doing it himself, other people would pick the names. But when in 77, I think the Ritviks also picked the names. That's best my recollection, the two changes.
Correctly, as far as I know, Pradyumna used to come up with most of the names. I'm sorry, my memory is very bad. Could you read that question again?
Essentially, the question is, what kind of adjustments did Srila Prabhupada make in the initiating system in 1977, according to your view?
Well, according to our view, of course, we presented it several times, but basically he took his physical response to the request for initiation he took himself out of the picture. In other words, basically the way he set it up was that people would simply become his disciples according to the discretion of the Ritviks. According to their discretion, they would be accepted as disciples, and those names would be written into his book. So that means, effectively, for the last 4 months that he was on the planet, people were being initiated without him having any physical knowledge of the matter. So our point is that there was nothing to prevent this system from continuing because it was working perfectly well while he was on the planet with no problems.
For you, is there any evidence, as Rabindra pointed out, that the Ritvik system was only for while Srila Prabhupada was present?
This has been our challenge to them from the beginning. What is their evidence that the Ritvik, we've given, although they've poo-pooed some of the evidence, actually we've given quite a bit of evidence that he did mean for it to continue. And I really haven't heard them give a real substantial scrap of evidence. Only indirect evidence. Some indirect evidence has been given, but no direct evidence that he didn't mean for it to continue. And we're still waiting for some real substantial direct evidence from their side. They say the onus is on them. I have to say that it seems to me we presented more evidence than they have. The onus is really on them. That evidence. They can't seem to do it.
Just as in courts of law, lawyers will present tons of evidence, citations from all kinds of cases. But evidence is not the only criteria. Everybody is presenting evidence. All over the place, you go Monday morning in the San Diego courts, they'll be presenting tons of evidence. Some of it is inadmissible, some of it is irrelevant. Scriptural evidence has to go according to certain codes of interpretation. Now, there's been millions of interpretations of these conversations. One point I'd like to point out that in courts of law, when you judge a person's last statements or his will, there's a legal term that is often used called a codicil. A codicil means an amending document that will reiterate or specifies certain unclear statements. Now, Srila Prabhupada made some statements in May. He made some statements on the 25th of May regarding Ritvik Acharyas. He was discussing it. He made some statements on the 28th of May. Bhavananda's understanding at the time on the 31st of May, his evidence to me was that this was on behalf of Prabhupada. The conversations in July, everybody talks May conversation, but the evidence in the July conversation only mentions Ritvik Acharya. The confirmation of that evidence the next day, the letter to all of the temple presidents of our movement, only confirms Ritvik Acharya. The following letter the next day to Kirtananda Maharaj only confirms Ritvik Acharya. The other letter on the 21st of July to the movement from Rameswar Swami also mentions Ritvik Acharya. The conversations in October also mentions Ritvik Acharya. And the last known statement of Srila Prabhupada, when he was directly asked, who will be the leader or the guru of the movement? If he already had put 11 successor acharyas, or 11 Diksha gurus as it has been alleged, or 11 successor cum Diksha acharyas, why wouldn't he say so on his last statement? It would have been very clear. But he did not say that. Because every evidence since July merely points out to Ritvik Acharya on behalf of Prabhupada. If you say that it is not, then you have to prove. I put you strictly to proof, as we say in courts of law. Come up with some factual evidence since that May statement till the 2nd of November statement, where you can factually establish beyond a reasonable doubt, according to Sadhu, Shastra, and Guru, and proper rules of interpretation, that is consistent, that is non-contradictory. Because let us not forget, although this conversation, we have agreed that we would not discuss the first 10 years, but when we start to look at many statements that have been cited, for example, in this report, as well as many other reports of our respectable GBCs, we're not talking just about initiations. We were talking about almost on the same level as Srila Prabhupada. We were talking about claims of successor acharyas to Srila Prabhupada. We were talking about in entirely different categories than initiating gurus. So I suggested the burden of proof, gentlemen, and I respectfully submit this before you. You establish beyond a reasonable doubt from some statements in 77, because that statement by Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I personally heard it, I personally wrote down, and I will stand by it. And I'm prepared to make an affidavit in an appropriate court of law if required. People may believe it, people may not believe it. That's what I heard, and I respectfully submit it before you.
You respond? I agree with
your hopes on one letter, then, and you say that's your evidence. It's not a very strong case, frankly. I mean, we've just presented reams of testimony, documents, and evidence to the contrary, and you've managed to come up with one letter. And if I can briefly analyze your quote for you, it is the custom that during the lifetime of the spiritual master you bring the prospective disciples to him. That's a custom. Becoming guru is not a custom. All right? Just let me finish. Becoming guru is not a custom. And taking disciples unlimitedly is not a custom for someone who cannot deliver them from the cycle of birth and death. And in the 5th canto, this is condemned. This is specifically condemned. That if one is not able to free his dependent, if he's not himself freed from the cycle of birth and death beyond the 4 defects, that he should not declare that he can liberate someone else from the cycle of birth and death, because, he says, by such unlawful activity, one plunges himself into the ocean of reproachment for such unlawful activities.
Or a father.
Yeah, but at least the father can turn them over to a bona fide spiritual master. What's your position?
Well, does the bona fide spiritual master become his father? That's what you say. Does the bona fide spiritual master become the husband?
He does the liberating. That's the real father. Guru is the father.
I think really what you're making a mistake is that you can't read what Srila Prabhupada is saying here. He says this is the law of disciplic succession. Now this is not just one quote. There's many other things. We have a whole ream of quotes nicely sent to us by Ajamil. But we didn't want to bother you with all of them, but you can read them. They're showing that this is, there's a preponderance of the evidence, if you want to go by counting, what the disciplic succession is. So Prabhupada said this is the law of disciplic succession. And the point is that if he's going to change a law, you really have to show that he gave clear, consistent instructions to do so. All the time the arguments get shifted back to the fact that they believe no one is a bona fide spiritual master. That is another case, which I'd be willing to talk about that case. Who is a spiritual master? Who is bona fide? If we don't have bona fide spiritual masters, what do we do? But now, to the end of the culpa, if we have to. But let's get this other thing out of the way, this entirely fallacious fabrication that Prabhupada made up some system of posthumous Ritvik Acharyas. It's a concoction. It's not Srila Prabhupada's order. Let's get that out of the way, then we can go on to discuss this other issue.
Another question. Since the idea of Ritvik isn't what we've customarily understood as the way that the disciplic succession goes on, and Srila Prabhupada didn't refer to it very much, it's certainly a very serious matter. Now, how do we know, what evidence is there that Srila Prabhupada would accept disciples via posthumous Ritvik? What guarantee is there that a person can feel confident that they have actually established a relationship with Srila Prabhupada, in fact, other than just in their mind?
I'll let Karnamrita Prabhu have a chance to.
Thank you very much. First, this question of posthumous. Prabhupada has already declared quite emphatically that there's no such thing as a dead guru. So what seems to be a problem here to me largely in accepting the conception of Ritvik Guru is the idea that Prabhupada is now beyond our reach, that Prabhupada cannot be contacted, that Prabhupada is not available to us. This idea of dead guru is not saying there is nothing but a living guru. As Prabhupada stated, there is only eternal guru. When he was questioned with respect to the living guru, as Rupa Vilas Prabhu stated earlier, Prabhupada was aghast. He actually wouldn't countenance the concept at all. He said, Guru is eternal. Guru is eternal. Therefore, the Guru is available. Now, under a circumstance which Prabhupada has clearly defined, where he did not see any of his disciples qualified to become gurus at the time of his departure, it is not a ludicrous thing to propose that this system would take the place of the normal procedure, the customary procedure. The customary procedure is outlined in this letter here. But unfortunately, Prabhupada didn't see anybody who was qualified to take up this customary business. What was he to do? It is very clear that he set up a Ritvik Acharya system which could function in his absence, because he made this to propose that this system would take the place of the normal procedure, the customary procedure. The customary procedure is outlined in this letter here. But unfortunately, Prabhupada didn't see anybody who was qualified to take up this customary business. What was he to do? It is very clear that he set up a Ritvik Acharya system which could function in his absence, because he made this proviso that the Ritvik Acharyas, on their discretion, they could initiate. On their discretion, they could give names. He clearly set up a system which could operate in his absence and in the absence of someone qualified. Don't forget, Prabhupada said no one was qualified. 1 month before the first of the appointment tapes, he stated quite emphatically that no one was qualified. So, the question that I could put to you in that respect is, when did you become qualified? Because that is Prabhupada's statement. No one was qualified. So perhaps we could have an answer to that question.
First of all, I want to address this issue of the idea of talking about a posthumous Ritvik system. Well, we're not allowed to mention the fact that Prabhupada departed or disappeared, that it's somehow rather an offense and a contradiction. I simply wish that Karnamrita Prabhu or these other people would settle this issue by writing Prabhupada a letter and letting us know what he says when he answers back, if he's living and present in the same way he was at all times. There has been a change. There has been a change, and there is a felt absence of Srila Prabhupada. When the Acharya departs, chaos comes. Things like that do happen, as we all well know. And that's what this whole discussion is about. It's about the fact that Srila Prabhupada has departed. He's not here in the same way that he was before. He says the Guru is available. Well, yes, the Guru is available. The question is, how is he available? I say that he's available according to the normal way of disciplic succession that was laid down by Srila Prabhupada. I say that he's available according to the normal way of disciplic succession that was laid down by Srila Prabhupada. I say that there's no indication, in my mind, that Srila Prabhupada made himself available in another way through a system of posthumous Ritviks. This is the way Srila Prabhupada is available, by the way Gurus have always been available, through the Parampara system. That's my answer to that. Srila Prabhupada, I might answer parenthetically just to get off the subject a little bit, did not quite emphatically say that no one was fit. He said, H-M-M-M, period. In the point of Tamal Krishna says, Prabhupada, I think none of us is fit. Prabhupada says, And then he goes on to say that you have to be trained. Now, I don't think that Srila Prabhupada gave any ringing endorsement to anybody. Obviously, if we want to get into this, I can give you a little bit of my judgment about what happened. My judgment about what happened, and this is not something I'm certain about, but it's just to me a reasonable understanding of what went on, is that Srila Prabhupada could understand that even among his best men, and I think we should understand that the 11 Ritvik Gurus were pretty much his best men. That means all of us were worse. That after 12 years of doing what he has done, these were his best men. And that, so among them, he appointed 11 of them to be Ritvik Gurus. Now, he knew very well where they were at. The spiritual master knows his disciples very well. If I can just repeat one incident that happened, for example, with Kirtanananda Swami, according to Bhakti Charu Swami, this is the last exchange that happened between Kirtanananda and Srila Prabhupada. That Prabhupada's sister, we call Pishima, came to cook for him. And Kirtanananda was his secretary, his servant at the time, didn't want her to cook for him, thought it'd be bad for Srila Prabhupada, got in a series of arguments with Srila Prabhupada over it. And when she finally brought some prasadam and she had cooked for Srila Prabhupada, Kirtanananda tried to take it away. And Prabhupada became furious. Bhakti Charu Swami is in the room, and said to Kirtanananda, don't ever think that you know more than the spiritual master. Kirtanananda turned around, left the room, packed his bags, and left Vrindavan. That was his last exchange with Srila Prabhupada. Don't you think that you ever know more than this spiritual master? So, Prabhupada obviously understood what was going on. Why? But my reasonable understanding is, I think it's a reasonable understanding, that when it came to actually, because he said, I shall select some of you, this is the selection that never was, I shall select some of you, that what he did was he both selected and didn't select. Very cleverly, obliquely, at an arm's length, he appointed 11 Ritvik Gurus, and also said, you cannot become Guru unless you are qualified. Now this to me, this was a nod. These are my best people. This was a nod in their direction. It was an oblique way of answering the question as who will initiate after your departure. That's what Srila Prabhupada did. I have more to say about that, but I'll stop now. May I have an extension, Srila?
Okay, go ahead.
Let him finish and then I'll let you. No, he appointed Ritvik with the understanding, but there's no indicate that they would become regular gurus if they were qualified. And that was his warning. You have to be qualified. And obviously, some of them weren't qualified. That's obvious from our history, that some of them weren't qualified. And Prabhupada knew it, and he didn't want to associate with, there's no ringing endorsement that these 11 are my chosen, heirs or disciples. These are the people I have complete confidence in. Prabhupada didn't do that. So that's what I believe that happened when Prabhupada appointed these 11 Ritviks. He did, in a way, give a nod, an indication, these are my best people. And what happened afterwards is not just a reflection on the nasty people or how fallen they were, it's a reflection on the state of the collective spiritual advancement of the Krishna consciousness movement at the time of Srila Prabhupada's departure. That's what we're suffering from. And I think from a lot of this suffering, people have made more advancement. That is, because that's how you make advancement, apparently, is by suffering like hell. And a lot of people have suffered. And some people, at any rate, have made more advancement. But that's the reason what's happened. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
I'll just say one thing. You issued a ringing challenge. When did you become fit to initiate? I'm unfit to initiate, but I disagree with your system anyway.
What was the last part? Could you repeat that?
I'm unfit to initiate, but I disagree with the posthumous Ritvik system anyway.
Okay, go ahead with it. I want to make a quick comment about the question. Prabhupada accepted everyone that the temple president wrote to him and advised. He accepted that. And he said at the discretion of the Ritvik, he would accept them. And by following Prabhupada's orders, as he told Tamal Krishna in a letter, then the initiator is with him. And so that's how Prabhupada would accept them, if they follow his instructions in his books. Mm-hmm. And that's all I wanted to say. It's clear and simple.
Right. Okay.
To Rupa Vilas, you state that a devotee becomes a bona fide spiritual master when he gets a direct order from Krishna in a dream or some revelation. When did Srila Prabhupada indicate that this was the way he wanted his disciplic succession to continue? It seems that this type of revelation or dream order is not practical. Why do you propose this as Prabhupada's system? So, of course, the basis of this is, on my order, you become guru. So, if it's not by, how are you suggesting that this should be, how does a devotee know when he's received the order? I think this is from Vedic Village Review, isn't it? There's something in there about this?
Well, we did quote something. Actually, in 1976 in New York, there was a conversation with Srila Prabhupada about this very topic. And he explained that the bona fide spiritual master, this Krishna, speaks to him directly. He told the reporter that whatever he wanted to know, that Krishna would tell him. So Rameshwar Swami tried to explain that no, actually, Yesham, what is that? Dadami Buddha Yogam Tam, that Krishna supplied intelligence, and in this way he was directly interacting with the devotee. And Prabhupada said, no, not like that. He said, I don't remember the exact words, but something like directly. And then recently in the 7th canto I read another description where Prabhupada talks there about how a devotee is always being dictated to from within the heart by Krishna what he is to do. So when one comes to this stage where Krishna begins to direct him personally, then we say at that point he becomes qualified. And in that state, many metaphysical things that are presently perhaps beyond our ken may and do take place. For instance, we know that in the history of our predecessor Acharyas, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the entire disciplic succession, the Panchatattva, all appeared to him and directed him in his preaching activities. That Srila Prabhupada was repeatedly, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did repeatedly appear to him in dreams, that Krishna personally appeared to him in the Jaladutta to give him encouragement. There are many such, Ramanujacharya, in the histories of the lives of the various acharyas, there are many, many, many such examples, and this is documented in the books of Srila Prabhupada also. Now where is that particular? For instance, in a letter that Srila Prabhupada wrote to Janardhan, which is often quoted, there is also this very interesting statement about Ban Maharaj. He says, "So that is a great history. It is not possible to say everything in this letter. But for the present be satisfied with these words, and later we shall talk more and more. On the whole, you may know that he is not a liberated person, and therefore he cannot initiate any person to Krishna consciousness. It requires special spiritual benediction from higher authorities." So that is another confirming statement.
So far, the only one of Srila Prabhupada's prominent disciples that is testified to having received dictation from Srila Prabhupada in a dream is Kirtanananda Swami. My question is, how the rest of us are going to know, how we're going to validate the dream of the next Acharya.
Right, well then, maybe I can proceed. Anyway, whether you acknowledge it or not, it appears to us that we have made a good case for the fact that he did establish an unusual system for initiation, which was not the traditional Gaudiya Vaishnava system of initiation in our Sampradaya. Now, that was done while he was on the planet. Now, when Srila Prabhupada made out his will, he mentions in one of the first sentences that this system of management, now I'm stressing this word management because the scriptural principle has to do with initiation. The specific means by which it's executed is more or less a detail of management. So he says here, this system of management will continue as it is now, and there is no need of any change. So the system, the practical system which he had set up in regards to initiation was the Ritvik system. And here he says that this system of management will continue as it is now, and there is no need of any change. Now it would appear that what happened after Srila Prabhupada's departure was a significant change from what he had established. And what has happened since that time as a means of reform also seems to be a significant departure from what was going on while he was present. And I may just repeat several statements that you yourself made a few years ago. After Srila Prabhupada's disappearance for many years, the GBC systematically misrepresented Srila Prabhupada's teachings and instructions about carrying on the disciplic succession. And the GBC instituted, encouraged, and for many years belligerently and obstinately defended symbols, rituals, practices, teachings, and structures meant to create and perpetuate for a small group an elite status to which they were never entitled. Now, I think the question I would put to you, has anything changed since you wrote this?
The answer is yes. That I stand by what I said. The GBC represented to us, falsely I believe, that Srila Prabhupada had appointed 11 pure devotees who were to be the spiritual masters for the whole society, that they were the spiritual masters of their disciples, that they were essentially the spiritual masters of their godbrothers, that each of them was supposed to be the spiritual master for the people in a geographical zone of the world, that the business of that we could only get Prabhupada's mercy through those godbrothers, and a host of other ideas which are so thoroughly discredited that they're no longer even spoken about, practically speaking, in today's ISKCON. So the answer to, do I feel that the circumstances I spoke about then have changed, is yes.
If Yashodanandana Prabhu heard directly from Srila Prabhupada that the Ritvik system should be installed, why did he wait so long to emphasize it instead of doing so in a paper mentioned by Ravindra, written in 1981?
A paper written by Ravindra in 1981. Could you perhaps give the facts?
You're referring to the 79 paper, the paper I referred to. In other words, in 1979, you wrote a paper in Vrindavan. In 1981, I guess you were some participation in this bona fide spiritual master and disciple paper.
All the facts regarding that paper?
Only the facts that you told me. And one of them is that you're one of the authors.
You exactly know the circumstances behind that paper. Before you're alleging, first of all, the paper is here. My name was never signed to this paper. I would like to state on record this paper, the bona fide spiritual master and the disciple, was a reply to a paper that had been issued, several papers that had been issued by the leading members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness in 78, 79, and 80. This paper does not contain my name. I never factually authored it. I never signed my name to it. I did write you a letter, by the way, but to the best of my knowledge and belief and recollection, the letter was not in 1984, because at that time I was already in Toronto, working for a law firm. The best of my knowledge and belief, my letter to you was 2 years earlier. Now, whether you have the original letter or not, I can't say.
It's undated, it's true.
But why did you, first of all, why did you state that I wrote it in 1984 when you did not have knowledge of the fact that it was in 1984?
Because it was written to me just after I got involved. That was in 1984. Okay, that's why I said that. So it was a deduction because you didn't date your letter, that it was 1984.
So it's an incorrect assumption.
It's an incorrect assumption if you didn't. I don't know if you remember any better than I do because it's not dated. In this paper that you have in front of you, as soon as I find it here, you mentioned the 79 paper. There's a very nice survey of all the different things that come out. Yeah, the 1981 paper, Bona Fide Spiritual Master and the Disciple. I helped in compiling many of the quotes and citations. That's what you say. Kailash Chandra Das, Dhruva Maharaj Das, and Bahushira Das were some of the contributing authors. So you were involved in the production of that by compiling quotations for that. Okay, that's just what I wanted.
First of all, when I was in Buffalo in 1980, Jadurani Dasi had been in New Vrindavan. She had been preaching to various members of the New Vrindavan community that Srila Prabhupada had never appointed 11 successors, and she was preaching especially that they had never been appointed as the Diksha Gurus of ISKCON. Her understanding at the time, from partial transcripts that she had seen from a paper issued by Rameswar Das and Shubhananda Das in July of 1980, was that Prabhupada never appointed successors, never appointed Diksha Gurus, but the system should have continued as it was, which is the main purpose of the paper that she wrote. She came to me from New Vrindavan. She was all bloodied up with black. I asked her, where have you come from? She said, I came from New Vrindavan. I've been kicked, I've been beaten up. They tried to put my sari on a pole because I was preaching that the 11 were not the appointed successors, and they had not been appointed the Diksha Gurus of ISKCON. This fact has been corroborated by many devotees. She asked me, I want to write a paper about Prabhupada's position and his meaning of what he meant for the continuation of ISKCON. And she was very disturbed by many papers that had been issued, many GBC papers, many GBC reports, many various statements by various devotees. She said, could you help me present some quotes? I says, if you're going to present quotes that I'm going to say, and if you're not going to sign your name, then don't mention me. I helped her compile some of the quotes, but the allegation which you say in this, that I have supported, that Prabhupada never appointed Ritviks, this is error, because I never saw the final version of that. I give her some indication of what are the qualifications of a bona fide spiritual master, because I saw certain quotes from various GBCs that advocated that the scriptures are inconclusive, as it has been stated in the 1980 GBC report, and I thought that this was not exactly a proper statement. And I give her numerous quotes. I says, don't put my name unless I see the final version. As such, I think it's grossly unfair and inappropriate to allege that I was one of the authors. I helped them compile some things, and they've put it in their own words. And there is nobody in this that compiled this paper that even signed it. And there's also another reason that I'd like to respectfully submit before you. Namely that in 1978, when I was in Vrindavan, I did factually attempt to discuss this entire issue of the difference between Ritvik Acharya and Sampradaya Acharya with the entire GBC. As a matter of fact, I do have partial transcripts of the conversations that took place in February of 1979 where the question was raised by me, quote, what is the difference between a Ritvik Acharya and a Sampradaya Acharya? At that point, I did not even have the time to finish the question. 6 people interrupted me, and the point was cut off. The answer from Tamal Krishna Goswami, this has already all been discussed by the GBC. There is nothing to be discussed next. I raised my hand. The floor was never given. I also wrote a letter to Satsvarup Das Goswami on January 1st of 1979 with a list of 25 questions to be discussed, one of which was what was the actual statement of Srila Prabhupada in 1977 regarding the exact position, authority, and mandate of the 11 alleged Diksha Gurus. I never got an answer. Now, I don't know if Maharaj got it. I assume that because the Indian mail is notoriously bad. It was even signed in my previous name, Yasodanand Swami. I did attempt to bring the issue up. I did make every effort to bring it up. Unfortunately, many of the GBCs had concluded that this was not to be discussed, and many of them concluded that the very discussion of these topics was a sign of envy against Prabhupada, a sign of envy against the GBC, a sign of a nonsensical attitude of rebellion. Now, I suggest to you that this is not so proper. And not only that, but while they were telling me that the Gurukul and the Vrindavan project was going nicely, Rameshwar Das in 1978, and I wish to present as evidence. Nobody wants to hear it now. No, because this is directly relevant. Why I did not bring it up.
It's not that we don't want to hear it. It's just not appropriate for today.
The question that was raised, and I'm still a little confused about what the answer is, that we don't see, at least in the 79 paper, that you didn't at least make known to the people who were involved in the 81 paper, that you didn't make known to me on whatever date you sent this letter, the fact that you had firm, certain, and complete knowledge that Srila Prabhupada intended for the initiating gurus to go in the capacity of Ritviks, and that Prabhupada would always remain the initiating guru indefinitely. The question is, that we never heard about it.